because there's two things at play here. There's one, as you mentioned, there's this, where's your allegiance? Where do you spend a majority of your time? That's an important question. But there's also, where are the incentives in the right place to drive change, even if it's painful?
Hi, you're listening to The Secure Developer. It's part of the MyDevSecOps community, a platform for developers, operators, and security people to share their views and practices on DevSecOps, Dev and Sec collaboration, cloud security, and more. Check out mydevsecops.io to join the community and find other great resources. This podcast is sponsored by Snyk. Snyk is a dev-first security company helping companies fix vulnerabilities in open source components and containers without slowing down development. To learn more, visit snyk.io. On today's episode, Guy Podjarny, president and co-founder of Snyk, talks to Lucas Moody. Currently at Rubrik, Lucas is supporting the company through scaling the unicorn startup to IPO readiness. In the 4 years leading up to his time at Rubrik, Lucas was the first CISO at Palo Alto Networks as they grew into the largest enterprise security company in the world. Before that, Lucas was at a smattering of Silicon Valley companies, including eBay, PayPal, Intuit, Oracle, and KPMG.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, we have a great guest that has really seen security both from the side of the operator, but also the provider, sort of the vendor of the other side, and definitely digs a lot into sort of security innovation and forward thinking. It was Lucas Moody, who is the head of security innovation and operations at Rubrik. Lucas, thanks for coming onto the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So Lucas, before we dig in, tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, what is it that you do and how did you get into security in the first place?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate it. So I'm currently at Rubrik. I've been here at Rubrik for just under a year, just shy of a year now. But prior to my time here at Rubrik, I was at Palo Alto Networks, where I was the first CISO. And during that 4 years of time, kind of built that organization from scratch into what I believe to be a world-class organization that I left behind that I'm very proud of. And then before that, I was at companies like eBay, PayPal. I was at KPMG, did some consulting in security. I was at Oracle and Intuit. If you're not familiar with Intuit, it's a company responsible for TurboTax. So I think most of us are familiar with them in some capacity. But just very lucky to have had a journey like that one at some great companies here in Silicon Valley. How did I get my start in security? I was a CS major and actually joined Oracle at the beginning of my career in networking and quickly made the jump to security because around that time, that was before the year 2000, there were a lot of investments that were starting to be made because it was starting to be seen that, hey, this security thing is really important. Security-related issues can bring real existential threat to enterprise. We need to invest in this. And so I kind of took the leap back then, knowing that it was this dynamic space. No 2 days were the same. And it's that kind of, I've got ADD. And so I like to shift tasks and topics and learn new stuff. And I get bored easily. And so it was a good match for me. But yeah, today at Rubrik, innovation in operations, what does that mean? Operations, because I'm focused on the technology side of security, focused on what we need to build to ensure the company stays safe, ensure that we're doing the right things from a organizational development standpoint, engaging with engineering, engaging with the product management organization, supporting our brothers and sisters in IT to ensure the enterprise stays safe, and so on and so forth. So that's the operations side. And that also entails dealing with incident management, monitoring, response, and that type of thing. The innovation moniker, because that's kind of new.
Yeah, that's the unusual one, like security operations. You see more security innovation and operation is more enticing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of a requirement for me. And so leaving a post like CISO at Palo Alto Networks was really tough. And I salute those that are still there. It's a tough job. Doing security for a security company is no small task. It's like being a bodyguard for somebody that can very well defend themselves and somebody that's a target. And so it was a great 4 years. And so leaving that post, it was important for me to find the right next step. And for me, that was really being able to get involved with the product in a more sophisticated or in a more impactful way. And so Rubrik, if you're not familiar with the company, Rubrik is a company that's involved in ensuring that companies stay resilient, backup and recovery and data resiliency. And so that's what the company does as a core. But when I was talking to the CEO of the company, early founders, some of the other executives, to me, what really stepped out to me as an opportunity is this space straddles security pretty significantly, even if it doesn't come to mind immediately. Rubrik helps to keep enterprise online, operational, and resilient, but a lot of the data that goes into ensuring that the company does that really well also plays into solving for security in some pretty profound ways. And so I wanted to play a part in that. And that's why I joined the company, to really straddle not only security, but to try my hand and support the product management organization in thinking about how to evolve the product to not only be a backup and recovery product, but also in supporting security in more profound ways than it does today.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, makes perfect sense. Security is about risk reduction. I think when you talk about resilience of the business, losing your data, if you lose it to a breach, then you're in pretty bad shape. But for starters, you need to sort of preserve it and sort of have it not be lost in the first place. I think definitely an aspect of resilience. So it's interesting organizationally, though. So if I paraphrase, is it safe to say that security operation is around keeping Rubrik secure, and the security innovation piece is more about helping Rubrik's product keep the client secure? Is that the right way to inspect it? Or
that's absolutely right.
Maybe we can dig down a little bit into the org, how it's being structured. So are these two arms? Are you sort of more of an advisor? Is there a security operations group or sort of sub-organization, and then a security innovation sub-organization?
So the security organization proper rolls up in the same way that it does at a lot of tech companies. We roll up into the arm of the CFO. And so our primary responsibility as a security organization is securing the product and securing the enterprise. And in the same way that my role was carved out at Palo Alto Networks, where I had that same duality, supporting keeping the product secure as well as keeping the enterprise and the workforce secure, that's what our primary focus here at Rubrik is. The secondary moniker on innovation is where I spend about 30% of my time. So where 70% of it is really focused on that kind of core CISO-like responsibility, the CISO organization here does that same thing. That other 30% of the time, I'm working with the product teams, I'm working with customers, I'm engaging with partners, supporting in whatever way I can, go to market, predominantly to get out there, talk with customers around how the product is deployed and how that product can then be further advantaged with additional features, with additional capabilities, maybe in changing the way our thought process works around the way that we collect or process data, such that we can implement further downstream capabilities into the product to make it a little more attractive from a security perspective, as well as from a data resiliency perspective. And so an example of that would be, we're a data backup and recovery firm, but we also have capabilities into our product to support detection and remediation of ransomware. Because when you think about data resiliency, that's one of the biggest threats that comes in your stack of top risks. And so we've got a ransomware product called Radar. We've also got a data management arm around a product called Sonar. And we're starting to play in the space of helping you to understand what type of data you have stored where, how it's being leveraged, who has access to it, and things like that. And so, again, thinking about how the product core can help you solve for things that are also important that we have ready access to because of our install base, so that we start thinking about how better to evolve the product to support not only IT organizations, not only engineering teams, but also security organizations.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And to an extent, Lucas, it sounds like you've kind of put yourself back into that same situation. So you went from a security company, where you are offering security solutions as well as keeping the enterprise secure, to a company that you're helping turn into, in part, a security company as well, offering these types of products. I've had sort of fascinating conversations. Clearly, I think about this in the context of Sneak as well, but I had great conversations with Mike Hanley, for instance, from Duo Security, talking about having a security offering. And, I think in his case, he had a security labs team that was kind of hacking together, all sorts of forward-thinking product features that are largely, or in decent part, focused on the product offerings that Duo was offering. And I guess a little bit less maybe direct, but Sean Gordon at New Relic was talking about how they built sort of their insights product. They sort of built a security dashboard based on those and use that capability and are furthering. I'm actually not entirely sure where that sits today with New Relic's capabilities, but the intent was, okay, this can tee up a product or a capability there. So the path makes perfect sense to me as it's built up. When you think to Palo Alto, how much of this was happening there? So you're the CISO, you're securing the team. How did you collaborate, or how did your team collaborate with the product side as being the internal security team as well?
Sure. Without going into detail that would compromise my previous employer in any way, here's what I can share. The security team did play a significant role in thinking about the evolution of product. We were first customer. And so early critics of product also played a significant role in thinking about not only how to evolve the products that were our core, but also thinking about products that were peripheral to that core product that would add value to it, where 1+1 would be 3, that type of thing. And so obviously I can't go into significant detail, but thinking about the companies that Palo acquired over time, think of the security organization as being an early adopter of those products, finding ways to make it meld and live within the ecosystem and sitting alongside the product management and biz dev organizations to help better understand, like, how do these things tie together? Do 1+1 truly equal 3, or is 1+1 1.5? And so, yeah, it played a significant role there. Also, just super thankful for the opportunity back then to engage with customers and really hear customer testimonials, customer challenges, understanding what problems they were having, and then being able to carry that back as a person that had practitioner to practitioner dialogue to say, hey, these are the things that are really on the ground where there's really nothing being held back because, we're all in this together, and bringing that back to product to give feedback on things that maybe we weren't thinking about. But on the other hand, Palo had a massive army of folks within the product and engineering teams that were focused solely on security. And so that's where I think the big difference is, at a company like Rubrik, where the company is focused on data management, on resiliency, on recovery and backup. That's their core. And so the value that I can bring to the table here is a lot different than at a company like Palo Alto Networks, who, that's their bread and butter. That's what they do for a living. But, another point I'll bring up is we had and they still do, a world-class security operations team there that I'm proud to have played a part in building. But that team would have the product management folks roll through there just about every day to engage with the team and really find out, like, what's happening on the ground? What are the challenges you're having? When you're using our products and tools, what are the things you love? What are the things you hate? What doesn't work well? What is awesome? What are ways that you've used the product that we're not talking about with our own customers? Are there hidden features that were there for a reason or two, but that you're using in a way that we didn't anticipate? Things like that would come out all the time. And it's a fascinating place, amazing team of leaders and executives there. I mean, they had a rocket on their back and they still do. It's a great company, and was lucky to have had the chance to be there for 4 years.
It sounds like a super opportunity, and one that you tapped into around being both a current customer and a prospective future customer, kind of helping vet additional products that would come in by actually being a customer of those products, or at the very least starting from prospecting them and sort of seeing, are they good, are they bad, and even using them. So I guess maybe let's tap into that market perspective a bit, right, and talk about changes. So you were securing an organization and participating in kind of the guidance on what else does this significant security player, Palo Alto, build. You're building security capabilities into your existing company in Rubrik. What do you think, like, if you harken back of the last, 5-ish years in the world of security operations, what would you say are some of the big changes or revolutions that have happened in the space?
Particularly in security?
In security, in and around, I think, cybersecurity clearly, and in sort of this world of technology, right? I think I perceive both companies to be more in the cloud space, more in the advanced infrastructure type surrounding. But I guess, what would you say are changes from your perspective maybe 5 years ago? Maybe it's even personal learnings, right? When you sort of think about
absolutely.
What was top of mind and you and your peers needed to do 5 years ago, how is it different, than what you think you and others in your type of role would need to do today?
Absolutely. And I've got this great proving grounds for it just in the way that my own career has evolved over the past 10 years. But think about a company like Rubrik. And I think Rubrik represents what the future looks like in terms of companies. What I mean by that is Rubrik, we're largely a born in the cloud shop. We don't really have traditional data centers in the way that companies that have been around for years do. We also don't have to think about digital transformation in the same ways, because just about everything that we do is backdropped by SaaS and things like that. And so we're an interesting looking company. I'm sure Sneak looks a lot like that today as well, being a born in the cloud company yourself. Whereas companies that I've had in my past were companies that really had to be IT shops, right? They had to go and build data centers. They had to scale their businesses by scaling the number of colos that they had, and they had to scale linearly with the uptick in consumer activity and all the rest of that stuff. Such a tough problem to solve. So that's starting to change. And if you think about the roles that companies need to invest in to enable that, 10 years ago, CISO was a niche role. Most folks wouldn't have understood what the acronym stood for. And most of the folks that were involved in security were largely kind of born from compliance and that neighborhood of things, if you will. And the CIO was king. The CIO was building all this infrastructure, was at the head of digital transformation and all the rest. That's starting to change, right? So when I think about CIO's role more recently, it's largely becoming managing SaaS. And so we're not building these big, massive ERP infrastructures anymore. We're oftentimes leveraging what's deployed in cloud, and you're able to consume it as a service. CRM is the same way. CRM used to be a beast of a product to deploy. Think about it today. Everybody in the world is a Salesforce.com shop. Yeah. So just about, And so we're in this point where the CIO role is starting to change, and how that ends up in 5 years, who knows? But, I'm starting to see a lot of startups think about things like investing first in security, investing first in a chief security officer, chief information security officer, and then plugging in enablement and availability behind that organization. So that's new, right? And so seeing that evolve, seeing security take a front seat now, I think is just a sign of the times. I mean, you and I both know because we're security folks, but the prevalence of news associated with companies not thinking about security in the right way has really forced the hands of executives to think more profoundly around security. And so I love that. I think that's great. I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think it's an investment that probably should have been had some years back. But I like directionally where things are going. You see board of directors now getting smart on security, engaging with CISOs at other companies to go like, what are the things that I need to push top down as a board member to fulfill my fiduciary responsibilities, things like that. And so I love that. I think directionally it's where we need to go. It's time for us to think how CIO needs to evolve with the way that the world is changing too. Because I think there's a place for managing technology availability and enablement for companies. I mean, it's important that we all stay sharp, that we are agile, that we move quickly, that we're enabled with the right products. But we got to think about how best to organizationally enable that. So it's just an interesting space that I find fascinating, and I'm really excited to see it evolve.
I think it's a great point of view or thing to highlight. We talk about the lower cost of ownership of SaaS, like that cost of ownership comes from somewhere, right? Like there used to be, when most of your applications were not SaaS or are not SaaS, then there's a significant amount of cost of ownership that, you need an organization, you need a technology, you need a team and staff to be able to deal with that. If you're offloading that, you're creating a certain new problem, which is, a proliferation of SaaS providers. And it's almost like cloud security, right? There's a wrangling problem that requires its own solution and requires its own competency. And so I guess the competency around managing how data flows in the organization and how the organization can have the right sort of processes and technologies and tooling to run it, that need remains the same. But the whole operational arm of keeping these tools running and floating, that's a different set now. You're indeed sort of administering all these different SaaS solutions and ensuring they're connected as opposed to actually keeping systems and servers and data centers up.
Absolutely. If I could just add one point there, what you brought up is a really important point. And when I think about 10 years ago, everybody and their grandmother had to be a subject matter expertise in keeping the lights on. And that had to be their competitive advantage, right? Now with the offloading to providers, we're enabling them to become that subject matter expert. We're making it their problem to make that their competitive advantage so that we can invest elsewhere. And that's why when I say the CIO is evolving, the CIO is evolving in ways that I don't know if we have all the answers for it yet. It's not going away, but we certainly need to think better about how organizationally that team can now shift their attention to other ways in improving the business and business outcomes. And in many ways, in the same way that CISOs are starting to become more business leaders, because we have to be. If we're not, then we're not doing it right. CIOs too. And that's why I find it exciting and interesting to watch this all play out in front of us.
Yeah, for sure. It might even increase the strategic nature of the CIO role, because for many companies, keeping the lights on was a necessity, but wasn't necessarily a differentiator or something that they could tie into business value. Now, the great CIOs know how to sort of help the business operate fluidly, and smoothly, and move data from the right spot to the right spot and allow agility while preserving a certain amount of guardrails and setups. And a lot of these terms actually sound very security-esque. I'm interested though, another related change, would love to get your take on it, is I talk about this shift from IT security to application security, how in the pre-cloud era, applications were mostly, and I'm choosing black and white terminology here, applications were mostly this sort of some code and some libraries built on top of a central IT stack, which, we just discussed. And in the cloud surrounding, beyond the SaaS solutions for the technology you yourself build, that cloud stack is much smaller, but conceptually the layers exist. There's still a network that you can allow attackers in through. There's still an operating system that can be unpatched. There's still a database that has data that needs to be secured. But the decisions around all of that are now made by developers, the decision or the processes around securing those. So they also move a little bit out of the CIO's purview necessarily, because in most organizations, the CIO doesn't run those processes. The sort of development processes and systems are kind of kept separate from the rest of the organizations for a variety of reasons, including kind of the technical capacity of those teams. And so I guess in some conversations here, like the CISO of Slack, for instance, talk about Jeff, who's now at LinkedIn. When he was on the show, he talked about how they report into engineering or into the CTO. And he felt like that was actually very significant for a relationship inside the company, because the primary focus of the security organization, they were still doing the things that are outside the organization, but the primary allegiance, if you will, was to the product, to the security of the customer's data and such inside the organization. I guess how often do you see that? Is that being discussed? What do you think about CISOs, not just outside the CIO, or sometimes they may be at the board, but rather being a part of the technology organization?
I see that a lot, and I've been involved in a lot of conversations kind of ideating around this. And I think the jury's still out. And let me explain why I'm saying that. Because there's two things at play here. There's one, as you mentioned, there's this, where's your allegiance? Where do you spend a majority of your time? That's an important question. But there's also, where are the incentives in the right place to drive change, even if it's painful, right? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes what we do in security leads to outcomes that are harder than the path of least resistance. And I bring that up because there's often a conflict that starts to arise when you've got a team planted in an organization that also has objectives and outcomes that are, in many cases, anti-security. And what I mean by that is it's the same problem that you run into when you see these security organizations planted under CIO, right? Because you've got the CIO that has a set of business objectives that are oftentimes tied to 5 nines of availability, or enabling the business, or launching a new set of capabilities that enable the workforce, maybe by developing a tool or by adopting SaaS or something like that. So that's the primary focus. That's where bonuses are tied and all the rest. And in many cases with engineering teams, you run into a similar thing. It's around speed of delivery. It's around new product introduction. It's around being able to deliver a feature within a certain quarter, which oftentimes takes front seat. And when your cycles are hammered, when you've got resource constraints, that's when security can sometimes be pushed to the corner to go, well, we just need to release this feature. And you get the situation in which the two are competing. And that's what I like to try to get away from to the degree we can. Now, that's not to say that it happens like that all the time. I've met a lot of engineering leaders that put security ahead of all else, which is great. But that relies on being able to kind of raise above the fray and have a God's eye point of view of things. And so I say that because I encourage organizations to think about the incentives, where they live, and what that's going to do for your ability to execute on the right things at the right time, which is why I like the alignment with CFO, because ultimately the CFO owns a great deal of risks for the company. Go-to-market risk, financial risk, but also security-related risk. When you do that, they also own the purse strings. And so oftentimes you get a different kind of alignment, and you've got the ability to kind of operate at the E-staff level to drive change when it's absolutely necessary, even if it means making tough decisions. So that's a long way around the barn, but hopefully that makes sense. It can work in any one of those three. You can have CIOs that are focused on security. You can have engineering leaders or CTOs that are focused on security. At Palo Alto Networks, we had a CTO in Nir Zook, also the founder, who's also my boss, who was dedicated to security. He's a security guy. He wouldn't take no for an answer. So, it can work. As is with most things, it's all the dynamic of the company. And a lot of it is focused around people and what people's priorities are. So
I think it's a fascinating conversation that indeed doesn't have a silver bullet, but it's probably a conversation that hasn't been challenged up until the last sort of few years. It's been a bit more obvious. Like it could have been maybe under CFO or CIO, but I think that's where it stands. At Snyk, we actually ended up anchoring, because that sort of applies to our kind of conviction, to ensure that product security, application security, that sits within engineering. It's a part of the engineering organization. We started by having the sort of the information security, so the rest of the security responsibilities be outside. And we currently, to sort of help those groups stay the same, we actually moved that organization in its entirety to sort of be within engineering under the SVP engineering. And I think the perspective, and granted, it's also different needs for different size companies. And as you point out, we have security DNA throughout the company. So it's not necessarily a fair comparison, but we're basically considering whether over time, product security seems clear that it would stay within engineering, but the remainder or sort of the rest of the security organizations, including the CISO, as you say, jury's still out. We need to sort of see what's the right home as the organization evolves.
There's a lot of other things that play into it. To your point, there's this concept of security DNA. It's how fast and ready do you think about security as part of your day-to-day operations? You guys obviously are a security company in the same way that Palo Alto Networks was, and that kind of in many ways makes security an adjacency to all things that we do to stay alive. That's one. Two, to be able to hold these teams accountable. So if we are planting product security within engineering, we just need to be able to hold that team accountable to executing. That could be a great way to at least drive tactical change within that org, right? You're responsible for security now. We know all these things that are broken and wrong. That's a great way to do it. Now, if you have to go and find all those things that you're doing wrong, right? All of a sudden it's, well, if I don't find it, I can focus on that. And so, you just need to think about where you stand, where you are in your evolution. At some point, I hope, and I believe this is a crystal ball thing because it's not the way the world operates today. But at some point in the future, I see, especially as CISOs evolve and mature, because it's still a relatively immature space, if you will. We're still looking for really strong business leaders to come and take a step up and take on a role like this one, to really think about both straddling the business as well as the tech. But I hope at some point in the future, CISO is much more elevated in the organization. And for companies where it really matters, CEO level reporting structure is not, in my opinion, outside of the question. And so there's lots of ways to kind of see this play out, but you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no silver bullet. There's no right or wrong answer. You've got to be able to kind of peel back the layers and think about how your organization needs to organize around this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this has been a fascinating conversation. So we got quite absorbed into it. Maybe we squeeze in kind of one more bit to talk about practices. So, the world has kind of turned upside down recently, and applying security might not have been the same in the last sort of 6-7 months as it might have been before in the midst of the pandemic and various other challenges thrown at us. How have you approached, or what have you learned or changed when you were securing your current enterprise with the last 6 and 7 months? What changed and maybe what didn't work that you think is worth sharing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And it's a timely topic. And frankly, lots of folks are talking about this. I like asking that same question myself, just out of curiosity to hear how others are doing and how their world is being turned upside down, not at home, but at work,
Yeah.
And so without sharing all the things that we're investing in internally, what I will say at a high level is the strategy has had to change significantly. It's interesting because as we kind of turned the corner into 2020, we had a game plan and a roadmap that was about 18 to 24 months long. We had started that journey at the end of last year, and we were trudging along, and we had this plan to execute on a number of what I consider to be critical security related projects over that period of time. I want to say March rolled around. It was like end of March where all of a sudden we're not going into the office. The workforce is entirely remote. Everything had to kind of be thrown out the window, and we had to rethink where we were investing our dollars or resources, spending what was in our wallet, if you will, for security. And we realized quickly there was a lot of things that we didn't think about. We didn't really think about a 100% remote workforce. We didn't think about how to push security capability on the enablement side out to the endpoint. We were thinking more in terms of old school secure with the right infrastructure. And so we had to rethink some things. How do we secure the remote user in the same way that we think about a user that's in the office or in VPN and things like that? And so we had to rethink that, kind of took dollars from more of the infrastructure related projects and started pushing them more into how we were thinking about things like identity and access, multi-factor auth, adaptive auth, and things like that were always on our roadmap, but we just thought, that was a next year thing. And
bump them up the list.
Absolutely bump them up the list. And frankly speaking, it's been a really good time for us. Security is very much an in-person thing. Like, we need time with people. Security can't operate in a vacuum. Security relies upon our relationships with engineering or product teams or IT. And I question whether or not we'd be able to stay as productive when I'm sitting in my master bedroom to work on securing the company and the brand. And I've been surprised. It's been a journey, but I think we've gotten to some great outcomes despite all the crazy things that are happening outside of the walls that surround us in our new temporary prisons, if you will.
Yeah. That sounds definitely like a journey that I've sort of heard before, which is had to adapt, had to prioritize the sort of remote worker setup to it, and have adapted, have changed, and we sort of learn how to form those connections, book the office hours, book the one-on-ones, kind of maintain those relationships differently, not the same, but in a way that it also works.
Absolutely.
Before I let you go here, one question I like to ask every guest coming onto the show. So if you could give one bit of advice to a team looking to level up their security food, something they should start doing, they should stop doing, what would that advice be?
One piece of advice to uplift your security foo. God, I've had so many learnings. It's tough to focus on one, but maybe I'll talk about a few and you can decide.
You can pick a pet peeve as well. It can be the thing that's top of mind at the moment.
I think we had a chance to talk through one of them, which is, thinking about the appropriate incentives within large organizations and doing the right thing for security. We talked at length about that. But in many ways, the way that we're investing in security has been against a roadmap that has been well established. Right. And I see this a lot. I see security leaders take on a post within a new company, and we're kind of dusting off that old playbook and the way the world used to work. And I try to give feedback to that end as much as I can to those that are taking on new roles at new companies and have a chance to kind of greenfield security. And they're not doing it. They're kind of going back to the things that are tried and true that have made them successful in the past. And that doesn't work anymore. The old innovators, I won't mention any names because that's not the point of me bringing this up, but the old innovators, they just don't work for the way that just the technology world around us has evolved, but they still exist. And investments are still being made in those older, tried and true, I'm air quoting here since you can't see us, but the tried and true techs. And so that needs to change more rapidly, right? And so scrap your playbook when you take on a new security post. Rethink things from the ground up. You've got this great opportunity and you have runway, now that you've got this new role, to rethink things from the ground up. And I think once you start doing that, you start to realize that, hey, things are going to look different this time around. So that's one, and that's high level. But more tactically, and this is nothing new. This is nothing that's going to be new to your listeners. But we really made a concerted effort when I was at Palo Alto Networks to really rethink Red Team, what Red Team could be at Palo Alto Networks in supporting product security and application security. And we tried to scrap the old playbook. We borrowed from companies that know what success looked like here, but really thinking about carving out an independent Red Team that had full reign and a carte blanche hall pass to really hammer the product as a bad guy and to leverage the right tools to do so and to bring the attention of those things that are identified all the way up to the top. Can be a very powerful tool. I loved the work that we did in that capacity at Palo Alto Networks. I love the work that we're doing in that capacity here at Rubrik. It really helps to toss out the egos and go, look, we're all invested in this in a real way. And then part two to that is you've got that team that's independent, but also meld that with your operations team such that the two can learn from the behaviors that are happening on the opposite side. I hear a lot of companies talk about that as a principle, but I see it executed in that way very seldom. And I'm not saying we did it perfectly. There's always room for improvement, but investing in that, double down on those efforts can bring a lot of value for not necessarily a ton of effort and dollars. Invest in people, invest in talent, and get the business bought into the idea, and you can reap the rewards from that.
Yeah, really sound advice. Lucas, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think we probably could have gone on for another sort of a couple of hours here, but I think we're out of time here. Thanks a lot for coming on and kind of sharing this perspective and the fun conversation here.
Always enjoy time with you, Guy. I appreciate you making the time for me. Good luck with everything. Stay healthy and safe, and I hope to chat with you soon.
And to everybody tuning in, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you join us for the next one.
Thanks for listening to The Secure Developer. That's all we have time for today. For additional episodes and full transcriptions, visit mydevsecops.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved in the community, you can also find us on Twitter at @mydevsecops. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode. Bye for now.